Didn't I tell you last week that if you're going to put your faith in the Democrats, then be prepared to be disappointed?
Oh man, yes. And I
Mira,
think you also said that it was almost inevitable. The Brown Perspective. I'm your host, Eduardo, and I'm here with the one and only Reo.
buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, wherever you are. Aquí estamos nosotros.
Aquí estamos. Reo, ¿dónde estás que no te veo? Following up on our conversation last week about the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the whole, Republican hypocrisy, Democratic nativity. We, of course, this weekend got the name of the nominee that President Trump has selected for the position, and that's Judge Coney Barrett, who may help the conservative wing of this country undo a lot of the great work that RBG did to advance women's rights and human rights. So that is going to be the heart of our conversation today. So, some light topics to make your week more interesting and to help you expand your mind and your understanding of what's going on.
You consider this a light topic? Wow.
It's not a light topic, but it's important, and I think that it's amazing because out of all of the branches of government, I think the judiciary is one of those that is so critical and important. When you think about, she, I don't know how old she is, but obviously she's relative. Oh, it says right there, 48 years old.
48.
So she's very, very young for Supreme Court standards. So she's going to be there as a lifetime appointment. So she could potentially be there for decades. So defining and shaping the way our society operates.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that the Democrats are hinting that they may introduce legislation to limit how long a Supreme Court justice serves, but they may be just putting that out there as a threat. Hard to see if they would go through with that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, she's 48. She's young. She is conservative. She was a clerk for the late Justice Scalia, and she's also what would be considered a constitutionalist, which is a very rigid interpretation of the Constitution. And already they're signaling that things like Roe versus Wade is, even Trump here is saying that could be overturned. Then you have to look out for Obamacare that they're coming after. But I think that one is time sensitive because they have to do it before a certain date. And I think November 10 is a date that I saw. There's voting rights. So yeah, a lot of the what you would consider wins for the progressives are now under threat if they manage to confirm her. And I came across this article here this morning about the
Chuma.
the Senate Democrats' ready tactics to muck up Supreme Court confirmation. Didn't I tell you last week that if you're going to put your faith in the Democrats, then be prepared to be disappointed?
Oh man, yes. And I
Mira,
think you also said that it was almost inevitable that this was going to happen.
yeah, the opening line of this article says Senate Democrats can't stop Mitch McConnell from confirming a new Supreme Court justice, but they are already planning to make it as painful as possible. Does that, who cares about that? About whether or not they make it as painful as possible if the end result is that the Supreme Court justice is going to be nominated? Does that make a difference to you?
Well, well, it doesn't, but it kind of does. It kind of makes them, it puts their feet to the fire. And I think to the point that you also made, that in some ways it sets up the Senate races. It makes the current Senate incumbents who are fighting for their life are gonna have to defend some obviously their nominee, and also it gives ammunition to the Democratic Senate candidates that they can use in their campaign and to get their base going. And I think before we continue on this, I want to say that I'm sure that some of our legal minds, some of our legal fans of the Brown perspective may be disappointed by the fact that Judge Barbara Lagoa, Cuban American, wasn't nominated in this case, although she was up there. I think she was in top three, top five for the nomination. Obviously, that would have been interesting to have had a Latina, another Latina in the
Yeah.
Supreme Court. But I think here they went with the safest choice and closer to their base.
Yeah, you're right. And whenever I hear things like that about how important it is to have someone of either a female or a Latina, that is important to some degree. But at the end of the day, their political ideology is what's going to determine how they're going to vote on these cases, right? So, for example, just scenario, right? What if he would have chosen the Cuban American judge?
Mm-hmm.
And what if she was the one that voted to undo Roe versus Wade? Right?
Yeah.
Does it right, there's benefits in that it shows young girls out there that they can aspire to be a Supreme Court justice, but at the end of the day, if they're still voting conservative, then that seems to negate a lot of the any perceived benefits of having someone in there just for the sake of their background.
But she would have done it in that lovingly Latina way of, regañarte pero still love you.
You,
So I think it would have been slightly different.
you think so? I don't know about that. But what was your reaction, or what's your reaction as you process all this?
Um, I think part of it I wasn't surprised. Like as soon as I heard her name and I heard who she was, like I knew that she was the top choice, just because this is definitely about um, getting someone on the court who's gonna solidify the conservative legacy and agenda. And in my mind, even though she was more divided, I think her Senate vote was 55 to 43. So 55 Republicans voted for her and
Yeah.
43 Democrats voted against her. I know that the Cuban judge, she had more of a bipartisan appeal. I believe close to 80 senators voted for her confirmation, meaning that both Democratic and Republican senators voted for her. So I just knew that they were going to go this way because it's all about, getting in there and reversing so many of the laws and things that have been passed. And you mentioned the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. That is definitely the first thing on the shopping block, which is sad because we are not only in the middle of a pandemic, um, doing away. One of the things that they're trying to get away with is doing away with the pre-existing conditions, and we know so little about the long-lasting effects of coronavirus. But we do know that even those who have somewhat a mild coronavirus or COVID-19, that there's still some lingering impact. So obviously now we have those pre-existing conditions that are going to impact. So it just seems like this could not happen in a worse moment for us, and particularly for the people who don't have health care or who are just hanging by a thread.
And that's the one that's particularly baffling when it comes to all of these decisions that could be overturned. And because Roe versus Wade, I can understand, because that is tied to religion, to conservatives, to the way that they see that particular issue. But when it comes to Obamacare and rolling back all these protections, especially the ability of insurance companies to deny coverage based on the pre-existing conditions, that affects all of the people that are going to vote for, that are in support of that. So isn't it surprising or amazing that the Republicans get to openly say that we're going to roll back Obamacare, but there's no blowback at all? Yet despite them not having an alternative for people. Roll it back, and then what?
Yeah.
What are they going to give the people? It's not. I mean, Obamacare was already something that it gave some benefits and there were some positives. For example, the pre-existing conditions, but there was no public option. So it created all of these new people that were forced now to have insurance. So it was this giveaway to the insurance companies to get more people to pay insurance. But it wasn't perfect. But I bet you anything that the Republicans come up with is going to be even worse. So it's just a little bit mind-boggling that the people are still willing to give them their support, knowing that they're going to roll back benefits that I'm sure that they that serve them, that serve that community, with no alternative being presented. And so the only thing that I can think about is that they're in support, like they're compartmentalizing. They're supporting her. They're supporting this judge conservative decision because they care more about rolling back things like Roe versus Wade, about being harder on, like tougher on crime, right? Or voting rights laws and repealing those. They care more about that than they care about Obamacare, because that's the one that pretty obviously hurts them. Now, all the other ones are more ideologically, if you're conservative and you support them, they may not necessarily affect you, especially if you're some middle class white American, that whereas insurance could affect you if you don't have the adequate coverage or if you lose your job. Roe versus Wade, again, voting rights laws, those don't really affect them that directly.
Yeah. But to your point, though, it's interesting because in some ways, the Trump administration is doing a bait and switch. So I know that Trump is planning to sign some executive orders to protect pre-existing conditions, and also seeking to prevent surprise medical bills. So in some ways, while they're attacking and getting away, trying to get rid of Obamacare and repeal the law, they do this basically symbolic gesture to try to somehow make it seem like, yeah, oh yeah, he's doing, or his administration is doing something for me, and so I like what he's going to be doing better than what Obama did, even though obviously substantially it's not going to be as good as the protections provided under the Obamacare.
Yeah, and this.
So should we say Trump doesn't care? Should this be the Trump Don't Care Act? Actually, he calls it America First.
America First.
There's nothing more patriotic, baby, than being sick.
Well, there's a lot of people that believe that Trump really does care about them, that Trump cares about America, which is always the trick that these billionaires manage to pull on people, right? That to make them think that somehow a billionaire can identify and understand the needs of the common people, and that's going to go and represent them. And that's part of the tactic. But yeah, this reminds me of one of the reasons that I had heard before as to why a majority of the country votes against programs that are considered social safety nets, like food stamps and even healthcare, is because they have this impression, maybe as a result of all the propaganda in the news, that poor, lazy people are going to exploit them. So they don't want to give Medicare for all. They don't want to give welfare benefits because they have this idea in their head that it's this woman that's going out there having multiple partners, being careless, reckless, having kids, and then even
the welfare queen.
Yeah, exactly, the welfare queens, and then the husband's also exploiting that. And then the same thing with healthcare, that is these lazy people that just want to leech off the system and have coverage, but they don't want to work, they don't want to provide, they don't believe in the pick yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. So that could be at play here, that this is why it seems so strange that the Republican base lets the Republicans get away with things like that. Because at least, I'll give the Democrats and their base credit for this. If the Democrats were saying that we're going to repeal Obamacare, at least their base would care about that. At least the Democrats can't just come out and say that they're going to do certain things without getting blowback from their base. So in that sense, it is the Democratic base is a little more consistent, with the caveat, the only caveat I'll put in there is except when it comes to wars, because now all of a sudden both parties are pro-war. So the Democrats could, if assuming that there were no other major issues in this election, the Democrats could present a platform where they were going to be tough on Syria, tough on Iran, and potentially even invade these countries if we need to stop these dictators. The base would also be for that. Not the left, more radical, progressive, but the majority would be okay with that.
Yeah, and to your point on welfare, I think that there are people who probably are, as you describe them, taking advantage of the system, and that maybe that happens at at the lower socioeconomic part of the scale, but also happens in the other side of the scale for wealthy people who are having taken advantage of all these tax breaks and probably even more. So I'm sure if you compare by how much is a quote unquote welfare queen or king taken versus what the top 1% or wealthy people are taking, I'm sure that the wealthy people are getting a lot more benefits than those who are in more difficult financial situations. But even if that's the case, like, so what? Like, the majority of people are not doing that. The majority of people are hardworking. They just want to make sure that they don't lose their home, that they don't have to lose everything just to take care of a sick child or sick parent. They just want a little bit of help to get back on their feet, and then they want to be able to get a job and do what they need to do. Like, so that's what is so infuriating because, for me, I was, my mom and I took advantage of food stamps. I took advantage of at that time it was called the S-chip program, which was the state children's health insurance program. And, I got basically my health care and my dental work for free thanks to that program, or I think maybe I had to pay like $10 or $15. But thanks to that, I was able to be relatively healthy, to be able to focus on my studies and to eventually be able to go to school and do something with myself and pay it forward. So I think that's the frustrating thing about people not understanding that there's a reason why that social safety net is so important, not only to avoid suffering, but also just benefits us as a society, because that means that people can get on their feet and hopefully get on with their lives and get to a better place.
Yeah, they're very good at making the people fight for the scraps.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, the whole time, the large chunk of the wealth is extracted and moved to corporations, moved to either even to other countries that we give aid to, because it benefits corporations depending on whatever policy they have in that country. If we're aiding a country that is fighting against another country, but that fight is because we're trying to destabilize another country so that our corporations can then go in there and help rebuild it, then in that case, yeah, take all the taxpayer money and give all these subsidies and give all this foreign aid to these countries. But oh no, if it comes to helping out poor people, let's not give them benefits because they're going to exploit it, instead of actually tackling the problem of whatever small percentage of people it is that will exploit it. It's like, this isn't new. This isn't new to people. It's not like we don't know that no matter the situation, if you have some setup that involves humans, there will be a small percentage that will figure out how to game that system. And so you put protections in there. You find ways to deal with that, with the small percentage of people that are going to exploit it. But when it comes to these situations, they rather just say, no, let's just cut it all together because everyone's going to take advantage of it. We're going to have nothing but rampant welfare queens all over the place. So we're this dependence on the government. So instead of putting together ways to help people get out of welfare, so to give them an opportunity for upward mobility that allows them to naturally get out of welfare, if the economic conditions are such that it's hard for them to do that because of all the other policies that they're passing, then of course the people are going to have to stay on welfare because they have no other choice. It's hard for them. The way that this society works, the economic system, it's almost like a trap,
Yeah.
and for a lot of people that once they get caught up in that trap, it's impossible to get out of it. And the trap also captures a lot of middle income and even wealthy people because they believe all that nonsense. That I mean, you still have people to this day saying that why all these people that are on welfare, why can't they need to get off of it and just work, right? Just find a job.
It's interesting to me. I don't know if it's my ESL brain where you have welfare and wealth fair. So I think that we have welfare and wealth fair queens on both sides.
Which one's the sorry, wealth wealth fair queens or
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it is welfare and the other is welfare. So I guess in my mind, sort of the folks who are getting rich um, by some of the things that you mentioned, and obviously those who do need help in order to have that safety net in order to get back on their feet and hopefully be able to once again continue to contribute to our society. So I just for me, oh look at that welfare.
yeah, yeah,
I didn't know it was an actual term.
yeah, that's why I was surprised because I haven't heard it before.
What? Look at that.
Yeah, teaching me
Because of
something
my ESL brain, bro.
teaching me something new every day. Welfare. Yeah, it's just usually when you hear this, you call it corporate welfare. It's similar to when you say capitalism for the poor and socialism for the wealthy. This is let me go back to this page. All right. So what can the Democrats do at this point? Very little.
Yes.
They could have tried to impeach Trump. They could have tried to impeach him multiple times, perhaps. I don't know if that would have been effective. They certainly have a long list of things that they can impeach him on. Could they have gone down the list and impeached them on one thing, and then the Republicans turn down that motion, and then they go with another one? Hard to say. I think that would have damaged them politically. But that gets back to what I wanted to say here as well, which is this tactic, going back to them stalling and making it as hard as possible for Mitch McConnell. I think this is going to backfire on them. This is going to hurt them. And the reason why I think this could hurt them if they go down this path is because they don't have the facade or the right. They can't put a veneer to somehow make this seem justifiable. Because the Republicans are going to do a really good job of portraying the Democrats as being these whiny people that are just trying delay tactics for no good reason.
No, that's bullshit. They stole the Supreme Court seat.
I know that, but they had the right pretext, right? They had the right justification to give to the people. Oh, this is a monumental election. The House is the presidency is controlled by one party. The Senate is controlled by another. Let's wait until the people decide, because the people can then decide if they want to elect a new president and then also a new Senate. And in that case, it gives us the right to vote for a new Supreme Court justice. Or maybe that's the will of the people. That's what they used. And I know it's BS, but it worked to the extent that people, at least the majority of the people that were in the sidelines, it didn't seem to affect Republicans that much. But what is it? What justification can the Democrats use here, apart from the fact that they're just stalling? That's not good.
It's not just stalling. Is saying that, hey, this is wrong. This is something that shouldn't be done. That in part because of what the majority leader Mitch McConnell said last time around. We're so close to this election, and we should let people
I don't
people
think that's
weigh in,
strong enough.
and I think, well, it's funny because I don't know if you saw the clip of when the president and the first lady went to pay their respects to RBG. There were people there, saying, "Vote him out, respect her wish." So I think that there's something very raw about trying to replace such an icon during this particular political moment. And I don't know if you saw it, but I know that the Biden Harris campaign did a really nice ad about about RBG and sort of the importance of protecting her legacy as one of their ads.
Yeah, but what's important is whether or not those undecided voters care about things like that, and whether or not you can convince them that they should care. Does that make sense? This is
Yeah.
all political theater. This is a circus. None of these things really should. The Republicans are hypocrites and they stalled, and now the Democrats are trying to stall. All you're trying to do is who has the moral authority here to stall. And when it came to the Republicans doing it, they were able to present this front that on a moral basis, they had the justification, or on some ethical basis, or on some basis that pretends to care about what the voters say, that's their justification. And enough people believe that it didn't hurt them as much. I'm not sure if the Democrats are going to be able to do that, also considering that the Republicans are going to try to make sure that at every step of the way that they portray the Democrats as petty and just stalling and trying to play politics and all these things, right? So we don't know if that's going to affect the outcome of the election. And the reason why I say that is because I think Republicans may have already strategically come to the conclusion that this benefits them, because otherwise they would have tried to wait until after the election if they felt that trying to rush
No.
the nomination or the vote on the nominee right now.
No, yeah, I mean, I think they know that the outcome of the election is uncertain. B, I mean, they're right. They do have the political power. That they do have the president who did the nomination and do have control of the Senate. And by now, we know that at least all Republican senators have indicated that. Well, no, actually, no. Two said that it wasn't fair to go ahead. The two women, the two Republican women, or two of the Republican women in the Senate, Susan Collins and the senator from Alaska, whose name is very complicated for this immigrant from Latin America. So that's the point. But I think that similar to what RBG used to do, like the dissent is very important. So in this case, how the Democrats dissent and how they fight this is very important because it does set the tone. It gives their candidates, it gives their base, and to a point, maybe it gives them the opportunity to make those arguments to those who are undecided, to say, you know what, this is not right. This is what's going to happen. It's going to happen, but this is the impact is going to happen to you. Obamacare is going to go away. All of these protections are going to go away. The environment's going to get hurt, and they can go down the line for the negative impacts of this decision, and then from there, people can decide who they want to entrust the Senate and the presidency to.
I can see that making a difference if the Democrats had a way to block this appointment, but they don't. There's no way that they can block it. And so,
yeah, so that's why you got to take the moral messaging ground.
yeah, a big part of this is going to depend on how effective the Republicans are at portraying this strategy that the Democrats would employ. So it's hard to say.
In some ways, I think the Republicans always have an easier message and an easier time. And I think they're, honestly, in my opinion, I think that sometimes they're better because they're more consistent, and they're also are better able to cross. They can 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 cross. close the ranks. So
Well,
take take what happened with this process. Like, right, there was two women senators who had the courage to say, no, this is messed up. But then the other folks were like, wait, yeah, it's messed up, but you know what? I'm still a conservative. This is gonna benefit us. So I'm just gonna stick to the party line. So I think in terms of messaging and that consistency of coming together, I think the Republicans have always been better at that than Democrats.
well, they'll always have an easier time because their tactics are those of fear and anger. And when you use those tactics and that's what gets your base riled up in support of you, then the way that you behave, the way that you act, it's always a lot easier to get a reaction from your base. If the goal is a reaction, a fear based reaction, or a reaction based on anger, then that gives you a lot of different tools to get that reaction, right? You have more options to do that. So then you get the support of the people because that's how you've conditioned them anyway. The Democrats don't use this strategy. The Democrats need to get people to care about things like social safety net, whatever they're offering, right? Because I was going to say universal health care, but the Democrats aren't offering that. So let's say that the Democrats are offering something. Not Trump. They're hoping that not Trump scares people enough, but it doesn't seem to be working. Like name the number of things where the Democrats can go to their base and scare the hell out of them or piss them off about something. And it's
Well, I
hard.
think
The Republicans have way more because you can piss off Republicans about immigration. You can piss them off about the radical left burning down the city. You can scare them with the radical left that they're going to come and take everything from you. You can scare them. So just because those views are much more extreme, then it's easier to adopt policies to then go and get your base to behave in a predictable way. The Democrats have a harder time because it's more nuanced to the type of things that the Democrats pretend that they care about. It's more nuanced to then go out there and get support.
But I think we're in such a polarized society right now that those same issues that make conservatives angry are the same things that make liberals angry. So everything that's going on with immigration, sort of the not guilty verdict on the Breonna Taylor case, the RBG's passing, and sort of what's happening now with the appointment of Judge Coney Barrett, what's going on with the pandemic, what's going on economically. There's a lot of things that I think that, and the fact that I think the number is about 11 million people who gained healthcare access thanks to Obamacare. They're closer to losing that. So I think that there's a real fear of like, hey, if this goes through, if President Trump continues in office, you're gonna lose your health care. You're gonna lose the ability of having your kid on your health care plan for until they're 26, if you have health care, of course. So I think there's also the anger at the lack of a response around the pandemic that I think has a lot of people mobilized too.
But the problem with, I agree with you, there are things to be upset about as progressives and liberals. The problem is if you start with a huge pool of people that are upset, let's assume that you're starting from the ground, right? The rioters, the protesters, that's the base. That's where the anger is. By the time you get to the voting booth, which is where it makes a difference, you've lost a lot of people. So it's not translating to political action, which then translates to outcomes in voting. So in that sense, the Republicans still have an easier strategy because their base is already the base that is in the demographic age where they are more likely to vote. They don't have
Yeah.
the young people that it's harder to get them to vote. So yeah, so I agree with you. Yeah, there's issues that could anger. I still think there's not enough anger. I still think that it's easier to collectively upset or scare the Republican base than it is the liberal wing, because the liberals even They're too segregated. They're too divided. You have the liberals that lean more towards conservative, which are maybe not necessarily don't care as much about abortion. Maybe they're anti-abortion. They're still liberal though in other areas. And then you have the more radical progressives that are super liberal, pro rights, pro climate change policies. But there's just not enough though. There's not enough. It's not as easy. That tactic. That's why I'm saying that for the Democrats, it's a lot harder for them to get voter turnout, because the issues that they're representing are just historically, it's harder to galvanize a population around those things.
Okay, so we'll see. Because I think that, as in previous occasions, I think that people know that it's not just about protesting; it's also about voting. And I think we'll see. And I know because of the pandemic, there's been a reduction in events and opportunities for people to register and mobilize new voters. But I do think that people know that they need to do more than just protest, that they need to vote. And so we'll see. So we'll see what in the next, what is it, 38 days, what will happen if people do vote and have the opportunity to see some transformation at the polls.
Yeah, and this right now is also early on. The nomination was announced yesterday. Biden is supposed to give a response later today, or he may have already done it as we're recording this. And we're going to see how the pieces fall and what the next move from the Democrats is, if they have a move. I'm still, part of me, even though I'm pessimistic about this, part of me still thinks that they might pull a trick up their sleeve, but I'm not going to lose sleep over that, because I wouldn't
Never
be surprised.
know.
Yeah, it's hard to see what it is that I haven't even heard any other chatter about what the Democrats would do if they are able to win the Senate and the presidency. They're
Well,
not.
well, it's funny because there was a press conference that Schumer and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did, and I think they did talk about some of the things that you mentioned last time around in
Yeah,
terms of packing the court, changing things. So I think that the
but I
original
haven't.
response
Yeah,
from the Democrats was, "Oh, well, if you do this, then we're going to do X, Y, Z when we come to power." So
but that's dying down, and that's how gives you a sense of whether or not collectively as a party they're going to push for that. Because if that were the case, then they would have reached out to all their contacts. They would have started to already mobilize to make sure that that's plastered all over social media, all over the news, so that no matter where you go, if you get your news from Twitter or Google or Facebook, that these are the articles that you would be seeing, that you would see that if the Republicans go through with this is what we're going to do. You're not seeing that. So even though it was mentioned, it seems to be dying down. So I don't know at this point what the strategy is. We'll see in the next few weeks what the Democrats come up with, but it's as of now, it's hard to see where that's going, and I don't know how effective this strategy is going to be. It might even backfire, but we'll see. I appreciate your take on this as well, that it could be beneficial. So let's see. Look, in the past, the political calculations that the Democrats have made have backfired. So you got to keep that in mind as well, that maybe they're not the best at calculating potential outcomes. Maybe whoever's strategizing for them may not be the best person or group of people.
I don't know. They did get back the House in 2018, and they've been making some progress. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe there's a new crop of folks who, and that's the amazing thing, right? Because in some ways it is about some of that strategy at the top level and the messaging, and somehow that kind of gets sent out to the rest of the country, and that becomes sort of the talking points. But I also think that, I mean, there's that sort of organized uh, top to bottom strategy that comes from those folks who live and breathe this stuff. But I think there's also what's happening in the streets and what people just um, general perception is of what's going on. Um, so we'll
But
see. I think maybe and maybe when there's alignment between what people in the streets are feeling and that message, if they're able to align it and tap into that, I think that's where a lot of things may happen. The reality is 2020 has been a year for the books, so we'll see. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of things that have changed. I think a lot of people are talking about not only political organizing, but racial injustice and so many other things at a different level. So I think there is a heightened level of awareness that could result in 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 higher than usual participation, and also the fact that in some ways voting this year will be somewhat the easiest it has been. At least here in California and so many other states, people will be able to vote by mail, and so there's an opportunity for a lot new folks to have the opportunity to have their voices heard.
let's see what strategy they come up with, and we'll be able to talk about this in a few months to see if it worked out or not.
Yeah, do the post mortem.
Yeah. All right. You want to close us off?
Yes. So thank you for listening to us. As always, we encourage you to follow us on our websites. On YouTube, we have the Brown Perspective. We also are on Twitter and Instagram at the Brown Perspective TV. So where you can find information on our previous podcasts, and hopefully you can connect with us, share our episodes, let us know what you think. And thank you for listening to us. We really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to have these conversations with you. And till the next time, follow us at the Brown Perspective.
Nos vemos.